Well, I'd first like to start by thanking the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some insights on a journey that I was very lucky to be a small part of. What happens with these sort of conferences after lunch, you usually have somebody who energizes people. Do this, do that, stand up, something or the other. I'm horrible at that. Okay. So neither I'm going to ask you to do it, but I'm going to say, well, lunch is over and back to the conference. Okay. This is, I think, a sort of fairly sort of fascinating story, and to some extent, most of what I will talk about will be pre-UPI. Right? That's why it's the untold story. I think the story of UPI people know. It launched in 2016. This happened, that happened. Pandemic came in, digitization happened. The number of people who started using it, and so on and so forth, which also happens to coincide with the time when sort of mobile internet in the country was also taking off. So people were very aware of UPI. So the the untold story is to a large extent most things that happened before UPI, which actually led to UPI per se. Given that this is a sort of a scientific audience, I think one of the things that I'd sort of probably like to, and I know that a number of you are sort of physicists as well. One interesting perspective, I think, let's say if you're a physics modeler or a modeler, is the sort of notion of phase transitions. Right? And in physical systems, we have sort of used to modeling them in certain ways, capacities and whatnot, analytically, computationally, experimentally, and so on and so forth. But think of this as a sort of fairly major phase transition of an entire economy which trusted cash only when they held it. And now they are very happy trusting it, going from the purse to the phone. I think that's a sort of non-trivial phase transition to happen in an economy like India, right? Where there were plenty of naysayers about why this won't work, or why this will not happen, or why that will not happen. And now you get to the point where actually vegetable vendors will not accept cash in a lot of times. They just pay through this QR code. Okay, so with that sort of brief, let me start. So the untold story will have sort of 4 components to it. I'll set the context, which would be a sort of really large part. Then I'll actually show a documentary. It's a sort of 12, 13-minute documentary, which we made to capture at least give a glimpse of what happened pre the launch of UPI. I'll talk about the impact, and it's quite natural to ask kind of what next. Right? I mean, there's only so much we can keep saying that, hey, look at UPI, look at this, look at that, and so on and so forth. I mean, you have to say what next, right? At some point of time, you've got to stop talking about it and move on to the next thing. So now, one of the things that it's not as well, a couple of things which are not as well appreciated is that this was a 15-year journey when this all started. In fact, it started 20 years ago by a vision document by the Reserve Bank of India talking about the possibility of democratizing retail payments in the country. 2005 was that vision document. So it's been a long time in the making. The second thing that often is not as well appreciated is the number of organizations that had to come together to even make that 1 rupee transaction possible. It's a highly non-trivial thing. At the front end, you don't see it, you don't observe it. But what happened at the back end to make this happen was highly non-trivial. And the third is that the technology powering mobile payments, in particular IMPS and UPI, was developed purely in India. Sometimes, because the front end is an app by Google or WhatsApp or Amazon or PhonePe or Paytm, there's a tendency to believe that they actually created the solution, while their app actually sitting on top of the solution is just effectively a user interface to the underlying platform. So the Mobile Payment Forum of India had all of these entities in it. This goes back to 2008, 2009. You obviously had to have the policymakers and the regulators on board, the Reserve Bank of India. We had IDRBT, and this slide has a lot of acronyms, and I've intentionally kept it such. So if you feel overburdened by it, that's the intent, right? Because all of these entities had to come together. So you have this Banking Technology Research Organization, which is IDRBT, the Institute for Development of Research in Banking Technology, which was created by the Reserve Bank of India in order to look at the intersection of banking and technology. Then you had a technology partner or a knowledge partner, if you wish, which was IT Madras. And then you had an implementation agency, which was the National Payments Corporation of India, which still is at the helm of affairs in terms of integrating all of this and pioneering retail payments in the country. All the banks were on board. All the telecommunication service providers were on board. And a whole range of technology solution providers were also there. What is feasible technologically at that point of time? Remember, we're talking 2008, 2009, where for those of you who still remember, some will, some won't. And I'm not dating myself because things change very quickly. So I don't want to say, oh my God, that. Calls were expensive. SMSs were expensive. The most exciting feature out of a mobile phone was a torch. Pressed a button, light came out. Right? And people would give missed calls because it was so expensive. Hey, I'll get to your house, I'll give you a missed call, you come down. I'm not going to call again because I was charged. And the charge was expensive. And in that era, we were trying to think of what this world would look like. Right? In that area, so we went to the sort of coffee shop in IIT, you had all the students who had these Nokia 1100 phones, which had obviously fallen multiple times, and they had bandages on them. Right? So the world of smartphones had come in 2007 or so, whenever Steve Jobs came up with the smart. I mean, we were still sitting on, we were just ramping up the 2G, moving on to 3G at that point of time. That had 3 committees in it. A policy committee, business committee, which looked at financing issues, business issues, who's going to pay for what, and technology. And all of these various entities had representation in each of these committees. So everybody was putting their point of view across. The technology committee developed the standards and the protocols. You have to remember at that point of time, such a solution did not exist in the world. The closest approximation was one which was running in Kenya, which was a telco-led peer-to-peer payment system. Right? Which is you topped up your mobile phone, you could actually cash out at the other place. Right? That was called M-Pesa, that was in Kenya. Right? So standards for interoperability, which means any entity can talk to any entity. Standards for performance. You have to think when this scales up, any one extra transaction that you're putting in the place will probably hurt performance. So it has to be as lean as possible, being able to communicate with any entity while being absolutely conscious of security and privacy. Privacy means when you're developing the message formats, who can see what? And that was, again, a huge issue. I'm saying privacy is a huge issue today as well in the AI world, but who sees what? What do the banks see? What does NPCI see? What does anybody else in the ecosystem see? So the entire message formats had to be developed all the way from scratch. So at that point of time, when I used to give talks about this at the forum, I used to liken it to trying to think of developing the protocols for the internet. So the internet was, let's try and find protocols, transport protocols, routing protocols, all the various algorithms in a manner that you're trying to send even small amounts of information to anyone, anywhere, as fast as possible, as securely as possible. So in some sense, the problem statement was, can we develop a system where you can send any amount of money to anyone, anywhere, anytime, as fast as possible, as securely as possible, while preserving privacy? Anything one fails, the whole system would have collapsed, would not work. Right? So we had the mobile payment certification lab in IIT Madras. It was a government funded project. Right? We had research students. This was between 2009 and 2012, those 4 years. We had Masters of Science students, Masters of Technology students, research associates, where the objective was to evaluate different architectures and develop proof of concepts. Remember, there was nothing to rely on. So we couldn't say, well, this is what works somewhere else. What's the best possible adaptation of it in this context? That didn't exist. So all of this had to be done. So there was a huge research flavor to this, to say you could architect it this way. What are the consequences? You could architect this way. What are the consequences? Right? How does performance evaluation work? How does this scale as the number of users increases? How does this scale as the number of transactions increases? And so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the context. Right? And last year, we made a short documentary on this, right? It's a 12-minute documentary. So I'll share that. The journey of building better. As across the last 15 years, the entire story, the entire journey is a story of dream, a story of self-reliance, a story of can we build something which is not. It's not to become very. Experiencing is something that could not be done in. And opinions across India began dreaming about how these two different worlds could be brought together. Now, cash is a part of our, you can say, DNA. And getting people out of the cash DNA to this kind of a digital transaction is a huge kind of a challenge. The issue in those days was there was no Aadhaar. All these things were introduced after. And the only way that RBI actually allowed me to transfer money from one person to the other was from one bank account to another bank account. We decided a lot of numbers, and what we saw was that only 40% of the Indian population had bank accounts at that point in time. So that time, I thought that it was actually quite next to impossible. But these should cost people fine. Some of these okay, that's fine. We'll continue. And then what I'll do is I'll finish off and then you can just reshuffle your minds in terms of how you need to reorient it. Eventually, you'll have all the packets you need to understand what you need to understand. Having said that, we'll hopefully see the presentation. I'll aim to wrap up with the presentation within 2:30. What's the impact been? Right? Fast forward to today. So that was basically 80% pre-UPI. Then fast forward another 7-8 years post-UPI. What's the impact today? Literally as of today, as we speak. 375 million monthly active users on UPI in India. 80% of all digital payment transactions in India are on UPI. Today, 50% of global real-time, the operative word being real-time, payment transactions are from India. Elementary calculation, 40% of all global real-time transactions are happening on UPI today. Today means Jan 2025. This is statistics, which I obviously won't expect you to either read or remember. But these come out sort of every month. These are October, November, December for the two main products, IMPS and UPI. And in a nutshell, on UPI, there are 500 million transactions happening every single day. Every single day. And the approximate daily transacted value is 75,000 crores. every single day. Now, it's good to translate this into something, oops, sorry, into something, yeah, I pressed on that by mistake. So, as I said, the phase transition is a P2P, not person to person, but from purse to phone, which is a big cultural shift. Right? And if you were to translate it, in terms of, given that we're sitting in Hyderabad, that's 500 million biryanis being paid for every single day. Right? And if you go to Paradise and say biryani for two is 1,000 rupees, that basically translates into 750 million biryanis a day, feeding two people. So that's 1.5 billion people can eat. So the amount that is transacted means every person in India can have a biryani meal a day. Right? Just to put it in context, certainly within local context, just to get a sense. Otherwise, you have numbers in crores and billions, but it's like, hang on, how much does that actually translate into? So looking at some additional insights, the average daily transaction size on UPI is about 1,300 rupees, average, which means it's clearly catering for the 25 rupee transaction. And it's also catering for a 2,500 rupee transaction. You pay for coffee, it's 20 bucks, 25 bucks, 30 bucks, right? The average daily transaction size on IMPS is about 13,000. So clearly serving very different user needs as compared to UPI. Now, something that was in the documentary, which got missed, the first product that came out was IMPS, which was a push-based transaction, which is based on internet banking. When that stabilized, then we had a push and a pull. And then you had a virtual payment address, which became UPI. So that was in the video, right? So that's what I'm saying, IMPS and UPI. The entire architectures were built, but the first one that was launched was IMPS, internet banking. It was also on mobile, but then UPI was predominantly mobile, push and pull. So IMPS average transaction size is about 10x of UPI. UPI is catering for retail payments versus IMPS is more or less catering for business payments. Right? With an average transaction size of 13,000, that means you even have 25, 30, 40,000 rupee transactions actually taking place of that. And UPI is today processing about 38x more daily transactions than IMPS. So very, very different sort of user needs, so to speak. Architectures were the same, two different products, two different user segments, and different requirements. If I were to distill whatever I learned, saw, observed, not as UPI or mobile payments, but the UPI approach, which is, if I were to attempt to solve a complex problem in the world today, what are the lessons that can be learned from the UPI approach, which may serve as a potential guiding light for the next set of problems? Pick a challenging situation. So industry often talks in terms of use cases. But one of the things that was always there in the Mobile Payment Forum of India is, say, we need to fix the auto payment transaction, because that is the most stressful environment. The vendor payment is not as stressful. That is extremely. So think of the most challenging situation in a domain and see how technology can help. Not a sample, the most challenging. Because you solve that problem, all other problems will be solved. Second is, get a collection of unlike minds. Because you're trying to solve something which has not been solved before, it's complex. You're just not going to have a few domain experts who will be able to contribute. You need the policymakers, you need academics, you need faculty, you need students, you need industry. You'd have, a whole bunch of people would need to come together to push the barriers of innovation. Any one segment of domain experts will probably not be able to imagine a fuller solution. And the third is to work towards a democratic solution, which means phenomenally high in quality, but phenomenally low in price point and scalable. All of this has now come together in what is known as digital public infrastructure. Simply put, it has three elements. It's a collection of technological systems. It's a collaboration between many entities. And the three pillars on which it stands is interoperability, scalability, and open standards. Now, whether it's for security, whether it's for privacy, everything is open per se. So anybody can build on it. And these kind of come together in a sort of combinatorial, innovative way where you have digital identity in terms of Aadhaar, you've got payment systems in terms of IMPS and UPI, you've got document verification in terms of DigiLocker, and so on and so forth. Okay? So this is where we are today. And we've made tremendous strides across all of these, and Aadhaar, which is 1.3 billion people, UPI, IMPS, DigiLocker, and so on and so forth, which is now collectively known as DPI. So what next from here? If these were some of the thoughts 15 years ago, what is the world we should have 15 years from now? Right? That's the natural question to sort of ask. Claim we need to go from DPI to DPI. Any guesses? DPI to DPI. Digital public infrastructure to digital public intelligence. Right? We need to shift from DPI to DPI. Digital public infra to digital public intelligence. Era of AI is upon us. Right? Lots more digitization will happen, sure. But we've got the framework. We know how this works. Right? Whether it's an agri stack, whether it's a health stack, whether other stacks, we know how this game works. Right? But we don't know how the DPI, the second DPI, should work. So we're back to the drawing board. Now, there's a very interesting quote by Steve Jobs in the 70s where he says, computing should be like a bicycle for the mind. He says, humans are tool builders, and this should be a bicycle for the mind. And that was a sort of very famous quote of his in the 1970s. Can AI be a bicycle for everyone's mind? Not just if you can afford an Apple product. Right? Can AI, the thought-provoking question, should the guiding principles for AI be a bicycle for everyone's mind? If so, what are the elements of such a vision? Automation of mundane tasks. Sure. Amplification of human potential. Okay. Discovery. Don't just make me better at what I am. Help me discover things that I may be interested in. Discovery should be a key component. Just like a cycle, right? You're walking down this path and you're like, whoa, hang on, I didn't see that was there. Well, let me go there. If I like it, I stay, I go further. If not, I come back. That's what you do with the cycle. You can explore easily without too much of an effort at your end. If you have to walk down that path, you're like, yeah, I was going to walk there. But I can just cycle down quickly, have a look. And if I like, I stay there longer, great. And hence the analogy with the bicycle. But it has to be bicycle for everybody's mind. It has to be accessible. So it has to be accessible in your language. And finally, if it has to be a bicycle, it has to be affordable, like a bicycle. Your normally iTunes today at $20 a month. Sorry, that's not going to scale to a billion people. Not in India. You need order of magnitude less. You're looking at a max $2 a month. One tool. In any case, if you get 5 tools, you'll have to be paying $10 a month. So AI in the Indian context would be focus on Indian languages, focus on smaller domain-specific context-driven data sets. And these would naturally need smaller models. I put language in brackets attention. You need smaller models or smaller language models. Take this and combine it with the UPI approach. Pick the most challenging situation, get a bunch of unlike minds together, work towards a democratic solution. There are probably 10,000 situations that you can work towards. Not a problem. UPI payments was a specific problem. There could be probably 10,000 such across education, healthcare, financial services, transportation, communication, etc. Right? An attempt to work towards this is something that we have actually launched in IIT Madras, in particular in the IIT Madras Research Park last year, called CHAI. It has a nice Indian zing to it, Center for Human-Centric AI, which is aiming to embody the essence of essentially what I said previously. Right? So you got CHAI in a nice cooler with AI things coming out of it. That's something that we launched last year. We've got a whole bunch of sort of projects which we're working partly with the Supreme Court of India in looking at legal AI. We also have an MOU with Indian Parliament through Sansad TV for translation of Parliament proceedings in all Indian languages. As you can imagine, the Parliament situation is a very challenging situation. Right? Context, multilingual, high on emotion, very high on context. Right? There's references to all kinds of things out there. So that's an incredibly challenging situation, which we already have projects with, both, as I said, the Supreme Court for legal AI and for Parliament. So if you missed the documentary, as you'd always have a backup, right? Something going to go wrong. And if it has to go wrong, you'll go wrong. It'll certainly go wrong after lunch. Right? So you can actually scan that QR code. There's a bigger version there, if that makes it easier. You can actually scan the QR code. You'll go to UPS Untold, upsstory.com. The documentary plus additional material are there. So we made it a bit of a sort of documentary. So it's got cast of characters, just like a movie, and it's got members of the RBI and others. All on there is the cast of characters. So all the entities that I mentioned, the heads of those entities are actually part of the documentary. Members from IIT Madras, students, and if I can take the liberty of embarrassing Praveen, who's sitting right here, he did his MTech on this problem 15 years ago. And is now working in the tech sector in Hyderabad. So I said, you have to come along for this. So you'll find people represented from all the various entities, RBI, NPCI, all the various acronyms will be there in the documentary. Now, with the documentary remaining part of it, I would have been exactly on time. But now I'm early. So now we have two options. We can either attempt to see the documentary again, or if you see the QR code, it'll make a nice viewing during tea time. It's 12 minutes, tea time, we'll get at least 15, so that would be fine.
I would suggest that we try the distributed digital intelligence, the QR code, and we spend a little bit of time on discussion, questions, and answers. Thank you for the presentation, for the inspiring talk.